On the edge of the galaxy, in a sector where humans and the Isranians coexisted as allies, engineer Roland Graf found himself aboard the sleek, massive ship of the Isranians, a technologically superior race known for their logical minds and unflinching efficiency. Roland was accompanied by his loyal companion, a small tabby cat named Patches, who seemed entirely out of place amidst the sterile corridors of the alien craft. Roland adjusted his toolkit strap across his chest as he followed two towering Isranian officers down a narrow hallway. His mind was focused on the delicate task ahead, repairing the ship's malfunctioning energy conduit, but Patches, who was perched comfortably on his shoulder, had her green eyes wide open, scanning her surroundings with a level of alertness that was typical for her. The Isranians had been gracious, if a little dismissive of Roland's feline companion. To them, Patches was a mere Earth creature, insignificant in the vast expanse of the cosmos. One of the officers, Nzer, had already made several condescending remarks about primitive Earth animals, which Roland had tactfully ignored. "This is it, human Roland," Nzer said, his voice flat and emotionless as they arrived at a wide, circular chamber. The conduits running along the walls pulsed with flickers of unstable energy. "We have calculated the malfunction, but our attempts to repair it have been unsuccessful. Your expertise has been requested by our high engineer." Roland nodded, studying the damaged system. It was intricate, far more advanced than anything he'd worked with on human ships, but not beyond his understanding. He set down his toolkit and began unpacking his instruments, mentally preparing himself for the task at hand. As he started his work, Patches leapt down from his shoulder, her soft paws making no sound as she landed. She stretched lazily, then, in typical feline fashion, began wandering around the chamber, her whiskers twitching in curiosity. "What is it doing?" Nzer asked, eyes narrowing at the sight of the small creature roaming freely. Roland didn't look up from his tools. "Just being a cat. She likes to explore." Nzer shook his head. "Waste of life. Such creatures serve no purpose." Before Roland could respond, the room's lights dimmed suddenly, and a low, ominous hum reverberated through the ship. Nzer stiffened, his reptilian skin rippling in alarm. "Something is wrong," Nzer said, turning to his fellow officer. "That should not have happened." Roland's brow furrowed. "Is this part of the malfunction?" "No." The other officer, Lvak, replied coldly. "This is something else." Suddenly, Patches froze, her eyes locked on the far side of the chamber. She arched her back, her fur standing on end as she let out a low, warning growl. Roland followed her gaze, but saw nothing, just the metal bulkhead. He frowned. "Patches? What's wrong?" Nzer scoffed. "It's agitated by nothing. Animals are." The alien's words were cut short as a loud clang echoed through the chamber. The walls vibrated, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow shaft leading deeper into the ship. From the darkness within, a strange hissing sound emerged, like steam escaping from a pressurized valve. Roland's heart raced. "What the hell is that?" "We should not have tampered with the conduits," Lvak said in a tense voice. "There are sections of the ship that even we do not enter. This could be—" Before he could finish, a long, snake-like appendage shot out from the darkness, wrapping itself around Lvak's leg. The alien officer screamed. His usually calm demeanor shattered as the creature yanked him toward the shaft. Roland watched in horror as Lvak disappeared into the shadows, his screams echoing down the corridor. Nzer reached for his weapon, but before he could draw it, more tendrils emerged, writhing like monstrous vines. Roland grabbed his toolkit, backing away slowly, but Patches remained rooted to the spot, her eyes focused on the creatures with an intensity Roland had never seen before. "She knows something," Roland muttered to himself, his mind racing. The tendrils lashed out again, this time toward Nzer. The alien officer fired his weapon, but the energy blasts seemed to have no effect. Nzer was caught and pulled toward the shaft, his fate sealed. "Patches, come on!" Roland yelled, but the cat didn't move. Instead, Patches let out a sharp, angry yowl and leapt toward the creatures with a surprising agility. Her claws extended, and with a ferocity that seemed impossible for such a small creature, she swiped at the tendrils. The moment her claws made contact, the tendrils recoiled, hissing as if they'd been burned. Roland's eyes widened in disbelief. "What?" Patches continued her assault, darting and leaping with precision, each strike sending the creatures retreating further into the shaft. Eventually, with one final growl, she stood her ground, her fur still bristling, as the last of the tendrils slithered away into the darkness, the panel closing behind them with a heavy thud. The room fell silent. Roland stood there, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. His heart was still pounding, but the immediate danger seemed to have passed. Slowly, he walked over to Patches, who was now sitting calmly, grooming her paws as if nothing had happened. Nzer, who had somehow managed to survive the ordeal, was staring at the cat in stunned silence. How did it do that?" Roland knelt down and scratched Patches behind the ears. "She's not just a cat," he said with a small smile. "She's got instincts, something you can't program or engineer. You can't underestimate her." Nzer looked from Roland to Patches, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps there is more to these earth creatures than we thought." Roland chuckled softly, standing up and picking Patches up into his arms. "You're starting to understand why we keep them around." As they prepared to leave the chamber, Roland couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was happening aboard the ship, something the Israelians had overlooked. And if Patch's instincts were any indication, it was far from over. But for now, he was just grateful that his feline companion had saved their lives. The corridors of the Israelian ship seemed endless, the sterile metallic walls reflecting the dim blue lights that guided the way. Roland's breathing was still ragged, his body tense after narrowly escaping the attack. Patches, nestled safely in his arms, had gone quiet, her wide eyes alert and scanning their surroundings. Nzer, leading them through the ship, cast nervous glances back at the cat. "I can't believe we're running from this." His gaze dropped to Patches, the disbelief clear in his voice.
All inside.
"You saw what happened." Patches knew something was coming long before we did. "Maybe," Nzer muttered, his steps quickening, "but she's just a small, strange earth creature. How could she possibly have sensed them?" "I don't know," Roland admitted, stroking Patches' fur. "But if it weren't for her, we'd be dead." The ship was quieter now, but it didn't bring any comfort. There was a lingering tension in the air, as if the shadows themselves were watching them, waiting to strike again. They finally arrived at a secure control room, its door sliding open with a hiss. High Engineer Tvar stood at the center, surrounded by monitors and holographic displays. Her gaze shifted to them as they entered, her expression unreadable. She wasn't someone easily shaken, but the presence of the cat had clearly stirred some curiosity and doubt. "You return," Tvar said, her voice cool. "I trust there's a reason for this disruption." Tvar's eyes narrowed, but her voice remained calm. "Creatures? This ship is the most advanced in the sector. No life forms could have entered without detection." Roland stepped forward. "It's true. They came from the shadows, something I've never seen before. And Patches, my cat, she sensed them before they attacked. She reacted faster than any of us." Tvar raised an eyebrow, her gaze dropping to Patches, now comfortably perched in Roland's arms. "This small creature sensed them?" Roland nodded. "I don't know how or why, but she did." Before Tvar could respond, the ship's lights flickered, and a soft, unsettling hum reverberated through the walls. The room fell silent, and everyone instinctively froze, listening to the unfamiliar sound. "They're here," Roland whispered. Nzer moved to the nearest console, his fingers flying over the controls. "I'm detecting movement across multiple sectors, energy readings spiking, but there's no physical trace of any life forms." Tvares' expression darkened. "We need to defend this ship. Activate the emergency defense systems." Nzer nodded and began issuing commands, but Roland could see the tension in his posture. The ship may have been state-of-the-art, but its systems had never faced something like this. These creatures weren't just physical threats, they were something more, something no technology had prepared them for. Patches suddenly jumped out of Roland's arms, landing gracefully on the cold floor. Her tail twitched, and she moved cautiously toward the corner of the room, her eyes fixed on a shadow. Roland followed her gaze, his heart pounding. "They're close," he muttered. Tvar followed Roland's line of sight, frowning. "What is your creature doing?" "Trust me," Roland said, his voice steady despite his fear. "Patches can sense them. Wherever she's looking, they'll be." The lights flickered again, and for a moment the shadows in the corner seemed to shift unnaturally, as though they were alive. Patches arched her back, hissing softly, and the room's tension spiked. Without warning, something moved, fast. A dark, almost invisible form shot out of the shadows toward them. Roland barely had time to react, but he quickly dove for a nearby energy rifle, aiming at the oncoming creature. He fired, and the blast illuminated the room in a blinding flash. The creature screeched, a sound like metal grinding on metal, before evaporating into nothing. The shadow it left behind lingered for a moment longer before dispersing. "They're testing us," Nzer said, his voice low. "They aren't here to destroy the ship. They're after us." Tvar stood tall, her gaze sharp. "We need to find their source and eliminate them." "Roland, you're familiar with combat, yes?" "More than I'd like to be," Roland replied, gripping the rifle tighter. "But these things are unlike anything I've fought before." "Then we adapt," Tvar said coldly. "Nzer, get the crew ready. Full alert." Nzer hurried to relay the orders while Roland knelt beside Patches. She was calm again, though still focused, as if waiting for the next sign of danger. "You're our best warning system," Roland whispered to her. "Stay close." The minutes dragged on as the crew prepared, setting up defensive positions throughout the ship. Roland, rifle in hand, remained close to Tvar and Nzer as they moved through the ship, coordinating efforts. Every so often Patches would tense, signaling that another creature was near, and each time the crew was ready, taking them out before they could get too close. But the attacks were relentless. The creatures seemed to be everywhere, slipping through walls, disappearing into shadows, always just out of reach. And as much as they fought back, the creatures weren't slowing down. "We can't keep this up," Roland said, breathing hard after the latest skirmish. "They're too fast." "They're attacking strategically," Tvar noted grimly, "as if they're learning." Suddenly Patches darted ahead, her small form slipping through a narrow door. Roland's heart skipped a beat. "Patches!" he called, running after her. Tvar and Nzer followed, and they soon found themselves in an unfamiliar part of the ship, the air colder and the lights dimmer. Patches had stopped in front of a large ventilation grate, her eyes locked on the darkness within. "Something's in there," Roland said, raising his rifle. The grate shook slightly, as if something massive was pushing against it from the inside. The crew gathered behind them, weapons raised. Tvar took a step forward. "Whatever's behind that vent is the source, isn't it?" Roland nodded. "Feels like it." He turned to Patches, who was pacing back and forth, her tail twitching. She wasn't scared, but she was clearly uneasy. "We need to get in there," Roland said. "Whatever's hiding inside is controlling the attacks." "Allow me," Tvar said. She stepped forward, her tall frame moving with a calm precision. She pressed a button, releasing the locking mechanism on the grate, and it slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the darkness seemed alive, swirling and pulsing with malevolent energy. But within that darkness, Roland spotted something, a central figure, larger and more defined than the others. It was as if the creatures had coalesced into a single being, more dangerous and more intelligent. "We end this," Roland muttered, stepping into the chamber, rifle at the ready. "Together." The battle that followed was chaotic, with a shadowy creature lunging at them, tendrils of darkness lashing out. But Roland fought with a ferocity that matched the threat. Tvar and Zer held their ground, firing with precision, while the rest of the crew covered their flanks. Through it all, Patches stayed just ahead of them, guiding their movements with her uncanny intuition. Whenever the creature shifted or reappeared, Patches' instincts led them to strike first, cutting the creature's attack short. After what felt like an eternity, the creature let out a final, ear-piercing screech before dissolving into the dark mist that had once concealed it. The ship fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as the last remnants of the creature vanished. Roland collapsed to his knees, his breathing heavy. Patches walked over to him, rubbing against his leg as if to say, "It's over now." Tvar approached, her expression softer than before. "Your cat. She saved us." Roland smiled weakly, stroking Patches' fur. "She has a way of doing that." Tvar gave a respectful nod. "Perhaps there is more to these creatures of Earth than we understood." Roland looked down at Patches, who was now purring contentedly. "Maybe. Or maybe she just likes proving people wrong." The Isranian crew began to regroup, securing the area and repairing the damage. But one thing was clear. Thanks to Roland's quick thinking and Patches' uncanny instincts, they had survived. And as Roland watched the stars from the ship's viewport, he knew that in the vastness of space, sometimes, the smallest allies made the biggest difference. I hope you had a good time. If you liked my story, do not forget to comment and subscribe to my channel. Goodbye. See you in the next story.